So you have listened to a reading of the letter from Birmingham Jail by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And so we're going to now do a rhetorical analysis on that. Some of these questions have come from the backpacks versus briefcases that you read, or that we read together. But this is going to give you an analysis of the rhetoric, what devices were being used, and kind of the efficacy as well. And so you will do one of these each time we look at a speech. Now, not each one of these will be due. We are going to do a couple of these together, and then you'll do a couple with a partner, and you'll turn in a couple. So this one is not one that we're going to turn in, though. So let's go through this together. So the rhetorical situation. What is the context of the rhetoric? So the first question is asking you what is the exigence? And if you remember from the backpacks versus briefcases reading, the exigence is what happened. Like what is it that happened that made the rhetor respond? And so Dr. King was responding to a letter in the newspaper that was written by white clergymen who are just saying, you deserve rights, but rights will come. So kind of just, hang tight. Who's the audience? And we're concerned with who the primary audience is, not the secondary audience. The primary audience here was the clergymen. That is to whom he was writing, the ones who said, can't you just wait a little bit? The constraints of the rhetoric, and I hope that you all noticed, recognized, realized that this man was sitting in a jail cell. So he didn't have all these books at his disposal. He didn't have, he was in a jail cell, and this kind of speaks to his brilliance. But the constraint is what would keep someone from speaking to their audience. So him being in jail definitely would hinder his speaking to his audience. So the next section is evidence of argument types. So we have logos, ethos, and pathos. Remember, logos is the logical arguments. Ethos is the one that gives the rhetor credibility. And pathos is the part that, like, our feelings, okay? So we're looking for, in the text, evidence of logos. And one of the places where we see, evidence of logos is him stating that segregation is unjust. Okay. Other examples of logos. This is where he says injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. Logical argument. So the ethos is what gives him credibility. It's what gives him the credibility to speak on these matters. And so the ethos here, in the second paragraph, he states why he is here, why he was visiting, and how he ended up, how he ended up in that situation. Then he also, and you only have to list one, but just going over a couple of different. He also talked about how, the broken promises that had been given and how they decided to take on this nonviolent protest. And also talked about the fact that he was arrested because there was no permit. So, that's why he's there. That's why he has a claim to be an expert here. I was looking for another one. And then at the bottom of the second page where he is talking about where he gives facts about nonviolent direct action and why they choose to do this. So a couple of different examples there. Pathos of the situation. There are several different examples of that as well. But we see really the first example on the 3rd page. When he talks about when you have seen vicious mobs lynch your mothers and fathers at will and drown your sisters and brothers at whim, when you've seen hate-filled policemen curse, kick, and even kill your black brothers and sisters. You could indicate your answer kind of like this. But so that's pathos, because he is trying to help them relate to what's going on in his life. So does the rhetoric address the problem it claims to address? I would say yes, it does. Because he tells them why they cannot wait for rights to come. Is the rhetoric targeted at an audience who has the power to make change? I would say yes as well to that, because they could very well lend their support. Are the appeals appropriate to the audience? Again, yes. He's not being overly dramatic. Remember in our reading, the author talked about how some appeals are they have too much pathos, or some appeals have too much ethos. I think this strikes a good balance. Does the writer give enough information to make an informed decision? Again, I would say yes. He does. And remember that rhetor means speaker. Does the rhetor attempt to manipulate in any way? I don't think so. There's a thin line between pathos and too much pathos, and I think that he strikes this balance well. If you got too much pathos, then you're manipulating the emotions of your audience, and he doesn't attempt to do that. What other subclaims do you have to accept to understand the writer's main claim? Well, we have to accept the fact that everyone is equal and that segregation is bad. What possible negative effects might come from this rhetoric? Well, we know that he could be assassinated, which he was. Continuation of the wrongdoing. More violent reactions to protesters. So that question kind of asks you to think about what could happen. So the last question is list at least 2 rhetorical devices with examples. Now, you are welcome to use your handout for this and take a look and see what you can find. We know for sure that there are allusions. And there are lots of allusions. There are allusions to the Bible. There are allusions to history. There are allusions to literature. Biblical would be the most prevalent. Let's see here. I say they're prevalent. I'm trying to find it so I can give the example. Here we go. Okay. Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego as a biblical reference there. And so just give a brief example. And then we also have anaphora. which anaphora is, excuse me, a rhetorical device that repeats the same word or words at the beginning of successive phrases or sentences. Oh, we found it. I know what I'm looking for, I just cannot find it. Well, one example that I find pretty readily is rhetorical questions. So we'll use that instead. An example, one may well ask, how can you advocate breaking laws and obeying others? So it's a rhetorical question. And again, there is anaphora in there as well. Lots of different examples of rhetorical devices. But in order to get that question right, whenever you fill out your paper, you have to make sure that you give the example. Just listing the rhetorical device is not going to be sufficient. So that is how you do rhetorical analysis. And that is our rhetorical analysis from Letter from Birmingham Jail. Please let me know if you have any questions. Thanks so much.